Now let's discuss cognitive development in adolescence. At the beginning of adolescence, the brain is nearly full size, and there are two features of brain development that are nearly complete in adolescence: myelination and synaptic pruning. Myelination is the acquisition of fatty insulation that makes neurons transmit information faster, so neurons can communicate with each other at full speed. Synaptic pruning, hopefully you remember, is the weeding out of unnecessary connections between neurons. Brain imaging research reveals continued pruning of unused synapses in the cerebral cortex during adolescence. Linkages between the two cerebral hemispheres and between the prefrontal cortex and other areas in the cerebral cortex and inner brain expand, myelinate, and attain rapid communication. As a result, the prefrontal cortex becomes a more effective executive, yielding more complex, flexible, and adaptive thinking and behavior. However, fMRI evidence reveals that adolescents recruit the prefrontal cortex's network of connections with other brain areas less effectively than adults do, and teenagers' performance on executive function tasks requiring inhibition, planning, and future orientation is not yet fully mature. So even though the frontal cortex has developed quite a bit, it's still continuing to develop. So changes in the brain's emotional and social network lead teenagers to react more strongly to stressful events and to experience pleasurable stimuli more intensely. But because the cognitive control network is not yet functioning optimally, most teenagers find it very hard to manage these very powerful feelings. In contrast, changes in the limbic system is associated with reward, desire, pleasure, and emotional experiences. So changes in the limbic system around puberty result in increases in emotional arousal and in reward and sensation-seeking behavior. So I think it's really important to think about, what does all of this mean when it comes to public policy? If the adolescent's brain is not fully developed, it's not the same as a fully developed adult brain, then what does this mean about, for example, trying someone as an adult in a court of law? And this is really what that Bonnie and Scott article discusses. So I'd like you guys to read that, think about it, form your own view on what you think it means. So, although adolescence is recognized by developmental psychologists as a distinct stage that's separate from childhood and separate from adulthood, the law typically does not adopt rules applicable specifically to adolescence. Instead, on various issues, lawmakers have a tendency to draw these binary age boundaries between minors and those who are adults. So, although adolescents become legal adults for most purposes at 18 years of age, the threshold for defining adult status is not uniform. Some driving privileges, for example, are extended to adolescents in many states by about 16 years of age. You can buy alcohol at 21. Youth as young as 14, in some cases even younger, can be tried as adults in a court of law if it's a very serious crime. So, it's not consistent. So I think it's important to think about this relationship between brain growth in adolescence and public policy. So let's talk more specifically about how information processing improves in adolescence. So for information processing theorists, adolescence is not really a distinct, qualitatively different stage of cognitive development. Basically, everything is just getting better in adolescence. So this period is simply one in which rapidly changing childhood cognitive processes are tweaked to adult levels. So it's continuous change. Changes do take place in certain areas of cognition. So let's talk about working memory and processing speed. So the speed of cognitive processing actually changes very little after age 12. Adolescents' working memory capacity is really about the same as adults' working memory capacity. The change in working memory and processing speed that occurs in childhood just means that adolescents can process information more efficiently. So their greater information processing efficiency reflects that increased myelinization that has happened, which again allows for more rapid neural communication. Content knowledge is also increasing. Adolescents are equally knowledgeable to adults in certain domains and actually more knowledgeable in others, like computers, for example, or technology. So this knowledge indirectly enables them to learn, understand, and remember more new experiences. So adolescents really acquire adult-like levels of knowledge and understanding. So adolescents then are able to learn, to understand, to remember more new experiences. And as their content knowledge increases, adolescents are becoming better skilled at identifying strategies that are appropriate for a specific task. So they become better at knowing which type of study strategies, for example, work well. And adolescents often solve problems more readily than children, and they're going to do this more analytically. So children use heuristics or rules of thumb, whereas adolescents are much more analytical and much more logical in their problem solving. Adolescents have more sophisticated approaches to reasoning and problem solving. They're better skilled at finding weaknesses in arguments as well. This is part of the reason why adolescents often just want to know the reasoning behind certain rules maybe that their parents are making. So it's really not to be sassy or to be talking back. It's just that they want the rules to make sense. So when a parent says, okay, I need you home by 11, and they say, well, why not 11:30? It often sounds like they're being sassy, but part of it is just this change that we see in their problem solving and reasoning. They just want to know why, and they want to know the reason for it. So again, though, research indicates that just like adults, adolescents will sometimes use heuristics to find a good enough solution or an effortless solution. But in cases where the short, easy path isn't going to work well and they need to actually engage in more problem solving, they are able to do it. Also, like adults, their beliefs sometimes interfere with analytical or logical thought. So adolescents are also subject to making thought errors, like based on heuristics, for example. So if I gave you, let me give you an example. If I told you that, Mike wears glasses and sweater vests every day, he's got gray hair, and he's 5 feet 7 inches tall, do you think Mike is more likely to be a professor or a truck driver? So most of you might say that you think he's more likely to be a professor, but that's actually incorrect, and that would be incorrect reasoning because there are many more truck drivers in the world than there are professors. And so even though he might fit your stereotype of a professor, he actually would be more likely to be a truck driver just because there are more truck drivers than professors. So the basic takeaways from cognitive development in adolescence, though, are that the prefrontal cortex is maturing gradually. So it's not fully developed yet. This region, the prefrontal cortex, controls the brain's executive functions. Executive functions are those advanced cognitive processes that you employ when you're planning, when you need to control your impulses, when you're weighing decisions, you're weighing the consequences of decisions before acting. So maturation in the connections between the prefrontal cortex and other regions of the brain are also occurring gradually. So it does result in improvement over time in impulse control and emotional regulation, but it's not fully there yet. In contrast, there are these changes in the limbic system around puberty that result in increases in emotional arousal and in reward and sensation-seeking behavior.